Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I got a really good viewer suggestion the other day. They said that they fish a lot of smaller ponds, and this time of year they're dealing with a lot of snot grass. Snot grass is kind of that slimy stuff that grows on the bottom. It's really more of it's like a slime. I mean, is how I would describe it. And I just had to deal with this quite a bit actually at Norfolk Lake. Norfolk actually had a whole bunch of it. A lot of times it's on the north side of the coves, especially early in the spring. It's almost like that stuff starts to develop faster when you're talking about having more sun exposure. We had the same thing happening at Kentucky Lake. It was a black snot grass there, and at Norfolk, it was like a lime green. It was a very, very bright colored grass. But I figured this would be a really good opportunity to talk about some of the ways that I combat that. Naturally, you can fish any sort of bait that does not touch the bottom, and generally, you're going to fish through it pretty clean. But the reality is, a lot of times, you want to be fishing a bait that does have some bottom contact, or at least you can fish where you're keeping it still, especially in the spring, because those fish are really starting to relate to cover. They're starting to think about spawning. They're just not nearly as willing to chase as maybe they are in the pre spawn period. So I figured I would touch base on it. I've got some baits here that I definitely some baits and some actual tips for certain techniques that I think can really help you. And in some instances, unfortunately, you just don't have any ability to get away from it. You know, whether you're fishing a farm pond that is completely covered with it, or maybe you're just finding that the areas you want to fish have a lot of that snot grass. And in my personal opinion, the fish don't veer away from those areas. It's not like they don't like to be in those areas. In fact, like I said, in the spring, a lot of times this stuff grows on the north banks, which happen to be the banks that the bass really like because they're protected from your colder north winds. The warmer south winds will blow warmer water into those areas. And from that standpoint, it's what you got to fish. But use these tips and they will help you catch more fish and they'll help you bring your bait through those areas cleaner. Before I do touch base on those, I do want to remind you though that I do have a members only page as well. So if you want to check out my members content, that would be a great way to support the channel. We do additional monthly videos. We have a monthly live stream. You can have direct access to me. So check out the members only page. Uh, and you get a lot of additional tips on that. So let's touch base on some tips right here for you to deal with snodgrass. Now, I'm going to give you a bunch of different baits that I like, but I'm also going to give you some specific ways I like to fish it. So the first one we're going to talk about is this guy right here. So this is your Neko rig. So a Neko rig is nothing more than a wacky rig, but your weight is down at the bottom, whether you've got a screw in one like this tungsten Picasso weight, you can see it screws in, or you've got a nail weight inserted in the bottom. The reason I really like to fish a Neko rig this time of year when you're dealing with that snodgrass is the bait will fall like this, and depending on the worm that you use, especially if you're throwing one that's got some buoyancy, the bait will actually sit up off the bottom. So if your snodgrass is right on the bottom, you're keeping the bait away from it and you're keeping your bait upright. Now you can also keep a bait that's not super buoyant upright by just keeping some tension on your line. It'll actually keep it standing up. The other thing I like to do with the Neko rig, instead of rigging it, say down around where the egg sac is, like that, I actually like to raise it up and rig it closer to the tail. That will also help keep the hook point away from that snodgrass. But if you've got a Neko rig, what'll happen is that bait will just bounce along the bottom, and you very, very rarely will ever get any snodgrass around the weight, whether it's a nail weight inserted or a screw-in weight. It's just a really good, clean way of bringing your bait back that allows you to be very efficient on the water. So a Neko rig, definitely one of the best options out there. Now, along with that is your traditional wacky rig. A wacky rig is a great option as well. And specifically, I really like throwing the core tackle weedless wacky rig because the weight is brought down to the worm itself. If you're throwing a standard wacky rig that's got a little bit of weight to it and the head is further away, that head will fall point down and actually drive that weight into the snodgrass. With the core tackle weedless wacky shot, it'll actually sit like that, so your hook point is up away from the snodgrass. And that's one of the most important things is you don't, as soon as your hook point gets into the snodgrass, you're going to have snodgrass all over your bait. You want to be able to go into the snodgrass and pull the bait out clean. And a wacky rig is such a great presentation during the spring period. But one of the problems if you go with a weighted wacky rig is that weight will get down in it. So ideally, I like to go with either a weightless wacky rig or a very lightly weighted one, but one like the core tackle one where we've got the weight that connects to the worm itself. Another one, and this one might surprise you quite a bit, is I like to fish this jig specifically. This is the tightrope firework jig. It's tied so tightly that, and the jig material is cut so short that it actually will walk along the bottom versus driving down into that snodgrass. And a lot of times you're talking about fishing some of those hard objects like riprap banks, or maybe you've got a little bit of chunk rock, or maybe you've got some laydowns that you want to flip and you want a little bit bigger, bulkier weedless profile. Well, this is the jig for you. This jig will literally walk around the bottom. I like to put something like the little Super Trooper on the back, just a small profile, and it really seems to come over the snodgrass versus digging down into it. Now, I would say you want to go with a lighter jig in general. Don't go with the heavier ones, but you want one that will actually walk across the bottom. But that jig is really good for it, and it was designed to fish in areas that have a lot of that snodgrass. Another one, absolutely love, is a fluke. And I know that this goes back to fishing a bait up off the bottom, but a lot of times you're talking about fishing snodgrass that's clinging to objects. So maybe you've got some pads or some pieces of wood, and that snodgrass will actually like grow on it and kind of drift based on the current that's going by it, not necessarily river current, but the wind will push that snodgrass. So you'll have strands of it that could be several feet long at times. Well, a fluke, great spring bait, and it's really good at fishing around those areas. So whether you're fishing it like on the scamper rig right here, which is an exposed hook, or you're fishing it on a Texas rig, the point is the fluke is really good at like zipping right through that snodgrass and coming through it clean. And it's a phenomenal, phenomenal spring bait. So do not sleep on that guy either. And then last but not least is your drop shot. So drop shot, you got your weight, you got a leader to the hook, and that is again is allowing you to keep that up off the bottom. I think a drop shot is a phenomenal bait to work through those snodgrass areas. Now, when you do it, what you're going to find is your weight is going to get balled up in that snodgrass. But what you got to understand is your bait, which might be on generally for me a little bit longer leader when I'm fishing that. Maybe it's 18 inches, maybe it's 3 feet. The point is my bait is still clean up off the snodgrass. I'll actually at times just continue to fish the weight even though it's got snodgrass on it because you're going to get it on every cast. But your bait is still well above it and coming through clean. Those are really good options for fishing anytime you're fishing around that snodgrass. The other thing to keep in mind is that generally speaking, lighter the better. You're looking to keep your bait in those areas, and if you can fish let's say a one weight lighter than what you normally would fish in those areas, you're probably going to be a little bit more efficient coming through those areas clean. And the more times you can get your bait to come clean through the snodgrass, the more bites you're going to get. For whatever reason, it does seem like if your bait gets any of that stuff on it, the fish don't tend to like to eat your bait with that snodgrass. So hopefully this help answers some of the questions that I've gotten. Like I said, I've had to deal with it in my last 2 tournaments. I know a lot of people are dealing with it in the springtime. You just have a lot of that growth that starts happening as the water starts to warm up. So give these tips a try. Let me know in the comment section, do you have other tips that other viewers can learn from you regarding the snodgrass? And I'll put a link to each of these baits in the video description for you. You can check that out. If you're looking to make a purchase, you can support the channel by using my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. Otherwise, stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.